A hunter and a scientist can stand in the same forest and see two different maps. The scientist sees what has been written down, named, measured, filed away in a museum drawer. To that map, an animal becomes real on the day it is described. The hunter sees what has been watched, what his father pointed out to him, and his father before that. To that map, an animal is real because it has been tracked and avoided and lived beside for a very long time. For most of the last few centuries, when those two maps disagreed, the written one was trusted and the watched one was waved away. And time after time, the watched one turned out to be right. Notice, as we go, how recent much of this is. We might expect these stories to belong to a distant age of exploration, all sailing ships and blank spaces on the map. Some do, but others happened within living memory, and a few within the last handful of years, with satellites overhead and the world supposedly charted. The pattern did not end with the old explorers. It is still going on. What follows are 15 animals that people knew perfectly well long before science admitted they existed. In almost every case, the animal was not truly hiding. It was simply being overlooked by the only people who insisted on writing things down. I want to be careful, as we go, about what this does and does not prove. Local knowledge is not magic, and not every old story holds up. But a description handed down by people who share their forest with an animal is not a fairy tale. It is an observation. And an observation deserves to be tested, rather than dismissed. Let me start with one I have spent a good part of my life near. The first lives in the deep forests of Central Africa. For years, Europeans crossing those forests heard about a creature the local people knew well. Something like a horse, they said, striped in places like a zebra, moving quietly through the trees. To the outside experts, it sounded like a muddle of animals already on the list. They believed that list was more or less complete, and so they let the report slide. Right at the turn of the 20th century, a British administrator finally obtained pieces of striped skin and then a skull. The skull settled it. This was a real animal, entirely new to science, and a relative of the giraffe. We call it the okapi. Those forest people had never once doubted it was there. The only thing missing had been a scientist holding the bone. They knew far more than that it existed. They knew it browsed alone, quietly, and that the bold white stripes on its hindquarters were not decoration, but a signal, a pattern a calf could follow through the gloom behind its mother. They knew its shyness, its paths, its silence. Even now, more than a century later, the okapi is one of the harder large animals to see in the wild. Much of what we have learned since has come from cameras left running in the dark, quietly confirming what the forest people could have told us all along. Today the okapi is considered endangered, and the forest that hid it so well is under growing pressure. The second animal shows how thin that line can be. In the early 1990s, in the mountains along the border of Vietnam and Laos, a survey team was visiting hunters' homes, looking at what hung on the walls. Inside one house, they saw a strange pair of long, straight, pointed horns. Nothing on record matched them. Those horns belonged to an animal the local people knew and hunted, but that science had never described. It turned out to be a large forest ox, so rare and so elusive that some now call it the Asian unicorn. Its name is the saula. Think about how that discovery actually happened. It did not come from an explorer deep in the wild. It came from paying attention to what a village family already had, hanging in their home. What is humbling is how little we have learned since. In more than 30 years, almost no scientist has ever knowingly seen a living saula in the wild. It has appeared on a handful of camera traps, and a few individuals have been caught, though none has survived long once taken. By some reckonings, it is now among the rarest large animals on Earth, and some fear it is slipping away before we have understood it at all. The hunters knew it as part of their world. Science may end up knowing it mostly as an absence, a thing confirmed just in time to watch it go. Number 3 moved on 4 heavy legs, and for a long time its stories were treated as nonsense. On a few remote islands in Indonesia, sailors and islanders spoke of a giant lizard. A land crocodile, they said, big enough to take a goat, or worse. To most outsiders, that was exactly the kind of tall tale sailors were expected to bring home. A dragon on an island sounded like something invented to pass a long evening. Only in the early 20th century did specimens reach the wider world, and the tale turned out to be modest. The animal was real, and it was enormous. We call it the Komodo dragon, the largest lizard alive, and everything the islanders had said about it was true. For years, even so, science still misread how it kills, assuming its bite worked only through the filth of its mouth. Closer study overturned that. The Komodo dragon carries genuine venom glands in its lower jaw, and its bite delivers a mixture that stops blood from clotting and sends a victim's pressure falling. So the frightening heart of the islanders' account, that a bitten animal would weaken and quietly die, was not superstition at all. It was an accurate description of a venom that science only properly recognized within the last couple of decades. The dragon is also a kind of relic. On its handful of islands, cut off and free of larger competitors, a lizard was able to grow to a size that would be impossible almost anywhere else. Islands do that. They take the ordinary, and given enough time and isolation, let it become the extraordinary. The fourth was hiding in plain sight among our own close relatives. High in the volcanoes of Central Africa, local people knew of a very large ape that lived in the cold forests near the peaks. Western science recorded it only in the early 1900s, when a European officer shot one, and its remains were examined. It was a gorilla, but a distinct kind, adapted to the mountains. We call it the mountain gorilla. An animal that large, that close to us, and it still waited on the written map until almost the 20th century. The people living beside it had needed no such introduction. There is a second irony here. Once the outside world had its specimen, it built a monster around it, a chest-beating brute for adventure stories and later, for film. Only decades on, when researchers sat patiently with these apes year after year, did a truer picture emerge. The mountain gorilla lives in close, largely gentle family groups, led by a watchful male, passing its days quietly feeding on mountain plants. That creature the local people had always lived beside was never the beast the newcomers imagined. From a desperately low point, careful protection has since brought its numbers slowly back. The fifth arrival was met not with wonder, but with open disbelief. When the first platypus specimen reached Britain, near the end of the 1700s, the naturalists who examined it suspected a trick. A creature with the bill of a duck, the body of a mammal, and, as they later learned, one that laid eggs, seemed impossible. Some looked closely at the join between the bill and the fur, hunting for the stitches of a hoax. They were sure someone had sewn parts of different animals together. There were no stitches. The Aboriginal peoples of Australia had always known the animal as ordinary, one thread in a world they understood in detail. Science, faced with the same creature, reached first for the idea of a fraud. That is worth sitting with. The gap here was not knowledge of the animal. It was a refusal to believe the people who had it. And the platypus was not finished surprising anyone. It took science until the 1880s to accept that this mammal genuinely lays eggs, an argument that dragged on for decades. Stranger news came later still. The male, it turns out, carries a venomous spur on each hind leg, and the bill that struck the naturalists as comic is in fact a finely tuned instrument, able to sense the faint electric fields of prey moving in muddy water, while the animal's eyes and ears are shut. Each new fact took the written map years to accept. Each one, the animal had been quietly demonstrating the entire time. The platypus belongs, in fact, to a tiny and ancient club. It is one of only a very few mammals in the world that lay eggs, alongside the echidna, survivors of a branch of the family that split away in the deep past. Small wonder the newcomers struggled. They were looking at a living piece of a much older world. The sixth had been part of a great civilization's imagination for a very long time, before the West took an interest. In the mountains of China, the giant panda was known, and appeared here and there in old records, across many centuries. To European science, though, it did not exist until the 1860s, when a French missionary and naturalist obtained a skin and sent word home. Only then did the outside world meet an animal that had never been lost to the people who lived near it. Nothing about the panda was hidden. It was simply outside the pages that one half of the world happened to be reading. What followed was a long argument, not over whether the panda existed, but over what it even was. For more than a century, science could not agree whether it was a kind of bear or a giant relative of the raccoon. Only genetic work, much later, settled it firmly as a true bear. Other puzzles lingered. The panda has what looks like an extra thumb, in truth an enlarged wrist bone, for gripping and stripping bamboo. It carries the gut of a meat-eater, and yet lives almost entirely on a plant it digests poorly. China had known this animal for thousands of years, and yet it kept science busy explaining it for generations after the introduction. The seventh reached Europe, long before the animal itself did, in the strangest possible way. For centuries, a smooth, spiral tusk was traded across Europe as one of its most precious objects. It was sold as the horn of a unicorn and believed to hold power against poison. The horn was real, the unicorn was not. That tusk came from an Arctic whale with a single long tooth, an animal the Inuit of the far north had always known and hunted. We call it the narwhal. For centuries the deception held, and it was worth a fortune. A single tusk could be valued at many times its weight in gold, set into royal treasuries, carved into scepters, even built into a throne. Whole kingdoms prized an object whose true owner was a whale that the Arctic peoples could have named without a second thought. So here the order was reversed. A piece of the animal arrived first, wrapped in a myth, and the true creature behind it was understood only much later. Those Arctic peoples could have explained it all along. There is a further twist that science is still untangling. That famous tusk is not a horn but a single tooth, grown out through the lip in a long straight spiral, most often in the males. Recent work suggests it is threaded with nerve endings, sensitive to the water around it, and that the whales sometimes use it to stun small fish. Quite what it is fully for is debated even now. For countless generations, the Inuit had lived alongside the tusked whale, while Europe was still selling its tooth as a guard against poison. The eighth was thought to have died with the dinosaurs. Off the coast of southern Africa, and later near the Komodo Islands, local fishermen would now and then haul up a large, heavy, oily fish with strange fleshy fins. To them it was a known if unwelcome catch, with a name of its own. In 1938, one of these fish reached a scientist, and the reaction was astonishment. It was a coelacanth, a kind of fish believed extinct for many tens of millions of years. It had not been extinct at all. To the fishermen who occasionally caught it, there was no mystery here, only an ordinary fish. The revolution was entirely on the side of science, which had simply never thought to ask them. This story then did something remarkable. It happened again. After that first fish, in 1938, it took another 14 years and a standing reward before a second could be secured near the Komodo Islands, where local fishermen knew it perfectly well. Then, in the late 1990s, a wholly separate population turned up thousands of miles away, in Indonesia, first noticed by a scientist passing a local market stall. There too the fisherman already had a name for it, one that means king of the sea. Twice over, on opposite sides of an ocean, the living fossil was old news to the people who fished those waters. There is a reason this particular fish mattered so much. Its thick, fleshy fins move in a slow, alternating pattern, oddly like the gait of a four-legged animal, and they sit on the body where our own limbs would be. In the coelacanth, science was looking at a living hint of the long journey life once made from water onto land. For decades, it had chased that clue through fossils. All the while, fishermen had been pulling the answer up in their nets. Number 9 confused the experts for a different reason. On the island of Madagascar, there lives a peculiar creature of the night, with large eyes, huge ears, and one long, thin, bony finger that it uses to fish grubs out of wood. The Malagasy people knew it well, and treated it with a good deal of caution and belief. When science first examined it, in the 1700s, it could not decide what it was, and for a long while filed it among the rodents, misled by its teeth. That animal is the ai, and it is not a rodent at all. It is a highly unusual relative of ours, a primate. The people who lived with it had recognized it as its own singular thing long before science stopped forcing it into the wrong drawer. An animal like this earns its strangeness. That long, bony finger is a tool. The animal taps along a branch, listening for the hollow a grub leaves beneath the bark, then gnaws a small hole and hooks the grub out with the finger, doing the work a woodpecker does elsewhere in the world. Local belief about it ran deep and cut both ways. In some places it was taken as an omen of death and killed on sight, which did the animal no good at all. Science, for its part, at one point managed to declare the III extinct, only for it to be found again in the 1950s. Both maps, in the end, had underestimated it. The 10th is not remembered in a museum, but on stone. Across parts of northern Australia, there are rock paintings of a slender, striped, dog-like animal, made by Aboriginal artists. Some of them are thousands of years old. The animal in those paintings is the thylacine, the Tasmanian tiger. European science described it only in the early 1800s, and then, tragically, helped hunt it to extinction within little more than a century. Here, the local record does not merely predate the scientific one. It outreaches it by thousands of years, painted carefully on rock while the animal still moved across the mainland. Look closely at some of those paintings, and the detail is unmistakable. The stripes across the back, the stiff, thick base of the tail, In places, what looks like the pouch. These were not vague impressions. They were the careful record of people who had watched the animal closely. And here lies the somber part. Recall that the thylacine vanished from the Australian mainland thousands of years ago. So much of this art is a memorial to a creature already gone from that land long before any European saw a living one, on the island of Tasmania, and then drove it out of existence there too. The 11th spent even longer as a monster, before it was allowed to be an animal. Sailors across many centuries told of a vast tentacled beast rising from the deep sea, strong enough, they said, to pull at a ship. They called it the kraken. For a long time this was filed firmly under legend. Then, in the 1800s, the bodies of enormous squid began to wash ashore and be examined, and the monster shrank into a real creature, the giant squid. Even so, no one managed to see a living one in its own world, until this century, when cameras lowered into the deep finally captured it, alive. The gap between the first frightened story and the first honest photograph was measured in centuries. And even now, the animal keeps most of its life to itself. We know it grows very large, and that it has the biggest eyes in the entire animal kingdom, each one about the size of a dinner plate, built to gather the faintest light in the deep. Beyond that, much is guesswork. How it lives, how it breeds, how long it survives, we can barely say. The kraken has become a real animal, and yet remains almost as mysterious as when it was only a story. We have the monster now, but still not its secrets. Number 12 turned a piece of folklore into something bigger than anyone expected. In the highlands of southern Tanzania, local people spoke of a shy monkey they called the Kipunji, with a call and a manner all its own. For years, outsiders treated it as just a story of the hills. Only in the last 20 years or so did scientists confirm the animal, and when they studied it closely, they found more than a new species. It belonged to an entirely new group, the first new genus of African monkey named in over 80 years. The local name had been carrying accurate information the whole time. Science, arriving late, discovered that the villagers had undersold it, not oversold it. The surprise went deeper once the genetics came back. This shy highland monkey was not a near cousin of the mangabes it resembled at a glance. It sat, unexpectedly, close to the baboons, different enough to stand as its own branch of the family tree. That is why it earned a new genus, and not merely a new name. A monkey known to Tanzanian hill villagers as a scrap of everyday folklore turned out, in scientific terms, to be the most significant African primate find in the better part of a century. It is also, sadly, already among the rarer monkeys alive. The 13th came with instructions attached. In the remote forests of northern Myanmar, hunters described a monkey with an upturned nose and added a curious detail. When it rains, they said, the rain runs into its nose and makes it sneeze, so it sits with its head tucked down between its knees. Around the year 2010, science formally described that monkey, working at first from a dead specimen the hunters provided. The odd little behavior they had mentioned fit the shape of its face exactly. That is the kind of detail no distant expert could invent. It comes only from watching an animal live, in the rain, for a long time. That small piece of knowledge had a hard edge to it. The very habit the hunters described, tucking the head down out of the rain, is said to make the monkey easier to locate and to take. So the same close watching that gave science its first accurate description was also, in part, a hunting skill. The monkey was recognized by the outside world and found to be in danger almost in the same breath. Animals of the same kind were later found across the border in China, but the population stays small and its footing precarious. The 14th reminds us, this is not only history. Little more than a decade ago, in the forests of the central Congo, scientists confirmed a monkey with a striking, almost human face and a distinctive call. Local hunters had known it for generations and had a name for it, the lesula. It became one of very few African monkey species described in modern times, known, once again, to the people of the forest first, and to the wider world only after they pointed the way. How it first drew scientific attention says a great deal. It was not spotted deep in the wild, but noticed as a young captive animal kept in a local town, its unusual face too distinctive to ignore. Following that single thread led researchers to the wild population. The males carry a startling patch of bare blue skin and a face many people find almost unsettlingly human. Its range is small, which leaves it exposed, and it stands as a plain reminder that even our own order of animals, the primates, is not yet a closed book. And the 15th is the most recent of all. In the dry coastal forests of Vietnam, there lives a tiny animal like a miniature deer, silver across its back, small enough to sit in your hands. Villagers knew it and reported still seeing it, even as scientists feared it might be gone for good. Only a few years ago, a team set camera traps in the places the local people directed them to, and there it was. The silver-backed chevrotain, unseen by science for close to 30 years, alive exactly where the villagers had said. That rediscovery did not come from doubting them, it came from listening. Before it, science had almost nothing to go on. The animal was known from only a handful of specimens, one of them obtained from a hunter decades earlier, and then, for a very long time, silence. It grew out of months of patient work, with cameras set exactly where local people said to look, quietly gathering thousands of nighttime images. Even now, we know very little about how it lives. What little we do have, we owe almost entirely to villagers who never doubted it was still out there, stepping lightly through the coastal forest. So that is 15, and I could have gone on. The list is long, and it stretches from painted rock thousands of years old to camera traps switched on in the last few years. There is a small justice worth noticing before we finish. For a long time, these animals were handed the names of the outsiders who described them, while the local name was set aside as mere folklore. That has begun to change. The saula, the Kipunji, the lesula, several now carry, in science, the very names the local people used all along. The written map has started, at last, to copy down what the watched map always said. I want to close by being honest about what ties them together, because it is easy to draw the wrong lesson. The lesson is not that local people are never mistaken, or that every legend hides a real beast. They are not, and it does not. In an earlier age, tusks were sold as unicorn horns, and some creatures in old stories were only ever stories. Belief still has to answer to evidence. The lesson is narrower, and I think more useful. A description handed down by people who live with an animal is a genuine observation, and it should be treated as one. Taken seriously, tested, followed into the forest, not filed under superstition simply because it has not yet been written in the right language. And there is a cost to the delay. Several animals on this list were written into science only as they were slipping toward the edge. The thylacine was described and then hunted away. The saula was confirmed and may not last the century. When we treat local knowledge as folklore, we do not only slight the people who hold it. We sometimes lose the very animal they were trying to show us. In the years we spend refusing to look, over and over, the word discovery has been used for the moment a scientist arrived. But the animal was already known. It had a local name and a place in a way of life, sometimes for thousands of years. What we call discovery is very often just the day the two maps finally agreed. And it makes me wonder, standing at the edge of a forest like this one, how many animals are on the watched map still, patiently waiting for the written one to catch up.